what I wanted to focus on is employees who are coming in saying, I need an accommodation because I'm particularly susceptible to COVID-19, and my underlying medical condition could really impact me, and I need something done in the workplace, or I need some time off, or something like that. So which employees are entitled to accommodations that are related to COVID-19? Those employees who don't want to return to work because they're receiving unemployment are not entitled to an accommodation. The same is true for employees who are just simply afraid to return to the workforce. There's just no legal basis at all for an accommodation in that situation. And employees who do not have any symptoms associated with COVID-19 um, are not entitled to an accommodation or leave. Now, there may be some things that you're doing in the workplace to make it safe and healthy, and those are separate issues. They don't trigger obligations to provide a reasonable accommodation for a disability. Those employees who are caring for somebody who is at a high risk uh, for developing complications from COVID-19 are also not going to be entitled to an accommodation. Um, and But those employees who do have an impairment or some medical condition that places them at a higher risk for developing complications from COVID-19 are most likely going to be entitled to some type of accommodation, and things like chronic lung disease, serious heart conditions, individuals who are over 65 years of age are going to fall within that category as well. Asthma, kidney disease, and a lot of different conditions are going to fall into that category. So that's where the red flag is going to be up. That's where you want to be mindful to ensure you're doing your interactive process. And lastly, pregnant workers may also be entitled to an accommodation. It will depend. The CDC has said that based on the limited information they have to date, and research is ongoing, that it looks like pregnant women are not at any higher risk than adults who are not pregnant from contracting this disease. But I would be very cautious if you have a pregnant woman coming in asking for an accommodation. So you handle the requests in a very similar way that you would any other request for an accommodation, and that's you engage in the interactive process. Acknowledge that request, make sure it's in writing, verify from the employee, gather the information necessary to see if in fact an accommodation law even applies. And then you've got to talk back and forth with the employee about the accommodation itself. How are you limited? How is your request accommodation going to effectively address your limitation? And very important, document each step all the way. The same documentation requirements and notice requirements would apply to any other type of ordinary leave request or accommodation request based on a disability. So it's not really going to be very different in this situation, except that I would say that the EEOC has provided some very good guidance on this. And if be sure to look that up if you've got somebody coming in asking for an accommodation. And the EEOC has acknowledged the severe financial strains that this is causing businesses, and the guidance stresses employers to be flexible, to be open, look at low-cost solutions with materials on hand that might be used to help a physical accommodation for a worker who might be at high risk. So on the screen right now are some of the significant items of guidance that the EEOC has on its website. And again, I would encourage you to look at that and keep in mind when you want to be talking with the employee of exactly what is it you're asking. Can you make a temporary job restructure or a transfer or modifying a job schedule? And with the pandemic, it actually may be difficult to do some of those things. And the EEOC has also acknowledged that and recognizes that some of these things, in fact, that the economic times we're in may be an undue burden for the employee. And the EEOC has also acknowledged that you're not required to eliminate essential job functions as an accommodation with an individual with a disability, but they also state that you could restore that employee's job functions after the pandemic has passed.
And we had a
And I
good
think,
question come in here too, if I can interrupt. They're asking if somebody has a pre-existing condition, can the employer not bring them back, refuse to rehire them at this point, or is that open up a discrimination claim?
you need to be very careful with that, and you don't want to open up a discrimination claim, and you've got to really scrutinize your documentation and what are the legitimate business neutral reasons as to why you don't want to bring this person back. It's really going to be that's a tough one, and that raises red
And I think it
flags.
probably gets more into this accommodation process. Work with the employee and say, look, we understand you have this condition. Here's our concern. What do you think? And work with them and, work that out. And I think you're going to have to, do that step by step. Now, with this workers' comp issue Mike and I were just discussing too, there's some liability if you start bringing in high risk individuals into the workplace and they do contract the coronavirus. There's some liability there on the workers' comp side. So employers, have to approach that carefully. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. We could say yes or no at this point. You're going to have to do that interactive process.
Good points there, Anthony. And there's some significant statements by the EEOC on the undue hardship element or the step that an employer needs to look at when they're assessing a requested accommodation. The EEOC has acknowledged, it has said, if it is going to cause significant difficulty or expense, then the pandemic, that may be an undue hardship, and the employer could deny the requested accommodation. Though at the same time, the EEO states that if a particular accommodation poses an undue hardship, employers and employees should work together to determine if there may be an alternate that does not pose these problems. So if we can move on to that next slide, Anthony. So they've given some examples of what a significant expense is. It's harder to give employees temporary assignments or to get certain items to make a physical accommodation at the job site. It's more difficult to remove marginal functions, or you can't get some temporary workers to fill in for the person, the disabled person who's maybe asking for time off. And then the next slide would go over a couple of the items that the EEOC has said constitute significant expense. And that's a sudden loss of income or all income because of the pandemic. And you're going to look at the amount of discretionary funds that you have available. The EEOC cautions that just because an accommodation is going to cost you money, you can't deny the request. It's a weighing and balancing. You're looking at your budget, looking at the timetables of when the state or county says you can open, what your expected income may be at that time. Can you use some low cost alternatives? is it really going to cost you anything if all the employee is asking for is some time off work that's unpaid? And here's some best practices to keep compliant with the ADA, and when employees are asking for accommodations requests based on COVID-19. Review the EEOC guidance, and we've got that as a handout, I believe. Accommodate those individuals in the higher risk category, including employees who are over 65 years of age. The red flag goes up if you've got a pregnant woman coming in and asking for some accommodation. Maintain your documentation from start to finish, and thoroughly document that you've engaged in the interactive process. One thing I should have noted is that the EEOC has said that you can, in this pandemic, if you wish, you can completely forego the interactive process and just simply grant the request. If you opt to do that, be sure it's in writing, even have the employee sign off on it. The EEOC is also affording and advocating that employers can shorten the interactive process because of all of the constraints due to the pandemic. You can place time limits on the requests. Again, a lot of these accommodation requests may be temporary. And there's no obligation to continue on with the accommodations after the need has passed or after we're out of this pandemic.